So welcome everyone to the latest in a series of the development and support webinars delivered by the NIHR Academy. My name is Martine Scannell and I work in the NIHR Academy as the Development and Support Manager. This webinar, Developing a Frequent Feedback Culture in My Virtual and Hybrid Teams, is delivered in collaboration between NIHR Academy and Oak Ridge, one of our leadership and development program partners. Now, this webinar will be facilitated by Mark Blanchard and Joe Clare, both senior consultants at Oak Ridge, who have extensive experience in behavioural and cultural change and are passionate about helping people and teams to achieve their full potential. So, Joe or Mark, whoever's going first, I will hand over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Martine, and welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar. We're going to discuss a frequent feedback culture within organizations in the context of working in a hybrid world. So before we start, just to let you know, everybody's on mute. Any questions, you've got the Q&A panel to put your questions in there. If you've got any comments as we go along as well, then please add them into the chat and we can pick those up as we're going along. We've got a couple of polls to get your fingers exercised in this post lunchtime session. Have a pen and paper available if there's any little tips that you want to pick up there. And as Martina said, is that we're recording today. So if you miss anything, the recording will be available. If you're talking with any colleagues and they couldn't make it today, then the recording will be available afterwards. So without further ado, let's have a look at what we're going to cover today. So we're going to share some techniques to help you give and receive feedback in a way that promotes a positive response in both in person and in a remote setting. Explore some simple approaches you can take away for giving feedback for maximum impact. And just think about ways of actually reinforcing this culture of feedback within your team, so it kind of becomes the norm. The aim of this, it's the way we do things. It's not something special. It's just how we kind of operate as a team or as an organization. So feedback culture. I always say a feedback culture, what does that kind of look like? Well, to us, a feedback culture is one where people are actually responding to and positively responding to and acting on feedback that's received. But feedback is seen as a gift. It's something to be valued and to be acted upon. It's a gift and the giver and the receiver feel value in giving that feedback. Feedback doesn't have to be always negative or positive. It could be neutral feedback, but it's holistic feedback. It's feedback where the figure at the bottom left is like, yes, I've got some feedback. This is going to really help me. So that's really a feedback culture is kind of typified by seeing this and seeing it in daily life. We're going to open the first poll now. So it'd be interesting to hear from everybody. How would you describe your feedback culture in your team? So Joe, you able to open the poll for us?
I've just launched that, so hopefully you can see it on screen. Yeah, so just thinking about your feedback culture in your team. Where does it tend to focus? Is it on the negative? Is it on the positive? Is there any feedback at all? Or do you see and feel more of that holistic focus where it's kind of more normal, more recognizing that constructive and positive feedback?
So how are we doing?
So we've got coming up to 80, so we're nearly there. Let me end that poll now, last few seconds to get your feedback in. And I'm going to share the results right now. So you should be able to see that on the screen. No feedback at all, 18%. Feedback with that focus on negative, we've got 23%. Feedback with a focus on positive, 27%. And then that more holistic focus, 32. So good to see that holistic is the most popular type of culture, but again, worrying, no feedback at all, and actually only focusing on either negative or positive isn't as healthy as it could be, of course. Thanks, Mark.
Great, thank you. Close that. So what are the benefits of a feedback culture? There's some data and lots of data and statistics, but one that really resonated with me is that actually it's estimated that if you're in an organization of 10,000 staff, you probably spend around £30 million a year conducting performance appraisals. Yet analysis shows, studies show that around 9 in 10 managers or line managers are dissatisfied of how their organizations actually conduct annual performance reviews. And 9 out of 10 HR leaders say the process doesn't yield accurate information. The average line manager is probably spending 210 hours a year on activities related to reviews and performance reviews. So that equates to around 25 days a year. That's a lot of time and money and resources being invested. So the benefit of a feedback culture where you've got feedback continued being given outside of a formal process is actually in the long run, that's going to save time, money and resources and result in a more effective organization. Feedback is a great way of sharing data. It actually generates a huge amount of data. And so a colleague sharing feedback with each other, a manager sharing feedback with their staff and vice versa, that creates lots of data points. And the more data and information we have, the better decisions that we can make. If we leave things for formal feedback points of time, we actually lose that opportunity. So creating this feedback culture where it's kind of the norm, it's how we do things, actually creates a lot of great useful data. Linking effective feedback with productivity has been well studied. And there was one case study that actually found that 69% of employees would actually work harder if their efforts were being better recognized. So this continuous feedback culture helps staff become more engaged, and which then ends up being more productive. And finally, really enhancing better working relationships. So it really opens up dialogues between colleagues, recognizing the efforts, spotting the things that went well, and not being afraid of flagging up the things you go, if you'd done it slightly differently, this might have been the impact. And if feedback is seen as that gift, is that it's not something to be afraid of and be seen as a threat. Which brings us to the reason why, if you've got all these benefits of having a feedback culture, then why doesn't everybody do it? Because in a nutshell, because we're humans, and the human part of us starts to get in the way. So despite there being huge benefits of giving and receiving feedback, humans, we've got millennia of programming in us to seek out safety. So thousands of years ago, it actually was really useful for us to be able to pick up on the threats around us, because the tendency would be we might be eaten. Even if you're walking in town, being able to react really quickly to a cyclist riding down the pavement to jump out of the way is actually a really useful protective mechanism. The problem is those mechanisms quite often get in the way of us working really productively in the 21st century within teams. It wasn't really set up to do that. So quite often that millennia programming can get in the way of us reacting in a more positive way to feedback. So David Rock, there we go. So David Rock did some work in around about 2008, and he created what is known as the SCARF model. And it helps us kind of identify why we can see things as threat, and quite often feedback. If you imagine the last time somebody said to you, oh, I'd like to give you some feedback, or gave you feedback, how did you respond? Did you respond as if you're going to be attacked, and so you get really defensive? And this is where kind of our primitive brain kicks in, and we need to kind of overcome that to allow our human brain and logic and reasoning brain to actually look at that feedback and go, actually, that's really useful. That's going to help me get better. So David Rock's model, in effect, identified 5 triggers in humans. And based on those triggers, you can either move towards the feedback or the trigger, which is known as a reward response, or you move away from it, which is known as a threat response. So if you feel of any of these dimensions of being at risk or a threat from the feedback, the tendency would be you see that as a threat response, and then you get really defensive. And quite often what we see is, as we're getting feedback, it's seen as a criticism and critical of performance, and we can, quite naturally, we can feel defensive about it. If we can give feedback in a way that actually connects with the reward response, then you're much more likely for the other person to actually see that as a benefit and that feedback as a gift. So briefly going through the 5 dimensions is that if you feel your status is threatened, so receiving feedback and perceiving negatively on you about your status within your peer groups, then that could be seen as a threat response. Positive feedback around your status can produce a reward response. We like to feel about certainty. We like as humans to know what's kind of coming up so we can plan for that. A lack of clarity can trigger a threat response. Having more clarity can trigger this reward response. The sense of autonomy, if we feel we're in control of our of our jobs and how we conduct our work, then we can feel that a reward response from that. If we feel that control has been taken off us and autonomy is removed, that could be a threat. Relating to different people, so where a relationship may be threatened. So say you need to give some feedback to a colleague who your friend who's one of your circle of friends. Tendency is, given that you're less likely to give developmental feedback to them from fear of damaging the relationship. That sense of fairness, if we feel that we're being treated fairly, then we can accept that feedback in a more positive way. So what David Rock is suggesting here is that we can react in a couple of ways to feedback based on how we see it being impacting us personally. So as the giver of the feedback, what we can do is that we can kind of pick up on where the other person is in terms of stress levels, how they tend to react to feedback, what's their general style of how they work, what are some of their personality styles, and then think about us actually crafting the feedback in a way which is going to connect with their reward center rather than their threat center. So to kind of bring that to life a little bit, if we are connecting to the reward brain, and many of you may kind of identify with the triune brain model that was proposed by Paul McLean, sorry. So we've got three parts of the brain. We've got the primitive brain, which is kind of the millennia of programming to keep us safe from saber-toothed tigers or people cycling down the pavement. We've got the emotional brain, which is the limbic, and we've got the logical brain, which is the human for the reasoning. What studies are showing is that the primitive brain works a lot faster than the logical human brain. So as we're giving feedback, if the other person is kind of in the space of them being under a lot of stress and you're feeling that they're kind of going for a fight or flight response and you need to give them feedback, then there are suggestions on this slide, and the pack's available after the webinar today. But there are some things that we can do to connect with the instinctive brain. So for example, smiling while we're giving the feedback, that can then connect with the reward part if the person's kind of in that instinctive phase. If they're more kind of around the emotional, then praising them, appealing to their values, facial expressions and gestures. So there are some tips and techniques that you can use to connect with their emotional brain. Or maybe it's the logical brain. If you know the other person well, and actually, yeah, they're kind of quite reasoning and quite logical and think about things and quite thoughtful about feedback, then the way we can actually frame that feedback around structure, around expertise, statistics, ensuring that the feedback is given in a way that they're going to be receptive to that. And what you can do in terms of holistically giving feedback is, if you're not quite sure how the other person respond, is to actually mix these up, because the messaging that you can give then can connect really well with the reward brain. They're more likely then to accept that and see that as a gift and valuable for them, rather than seeing it as a threat. So Joe, have you got poll number 2 for us, please?
Yes, I'll just launch that now. So really interested to hear this. When giving feedback, which part of the other person's brain do you think you are tending to connect with? Do you go more into that, using that ability to communicate, to build the rapport and safety? Do you go more into values and emotions, or are you going straight for logical? It'll be interesting to see what's coming up. So we're getting some responses now. So just give you a few more seconds to get your final responses in. And we're seeing a leader. I'll share the results in a few seconds. So I'll end the poll right now and share the results. And as you can see, emotional brain is the top of the tree for those three options. So we've got 15% at instinctive brain, the primitive brain, 55% at emotional limbic brain, and 30% at logical brain.
That's great, thank you. Interesting there is that if the tendency is that the approach you use is to the emotional brain, just think about if the other person is instinctive or is in the logical, is that you may not be connecting with those, which is why it may be when you're giving feedback, you're thinking, I think I'm doing this right and it's all worded right, but the other person just not responding or reacting in the way I'd expect. Think about where they currently are, because what we find is that when everything's rosy in the garden, everything's really positive, people are much more receptive to and a bit more flexible about feedback. If the stress and pressure's on, that then tends to push us more to the instinctive brain reaction. So being conscious of the kind of the environment and how the person is, which is, it's important to kind of ask questions and understand the other person to make sure it's landed.
And just to point out, Mark, thinking about that in the remote and hybrid environment, often difficult to always pick up where people are. So really, hopefully making the use of cameras to be able to see people, or really tuning into tone and how people are talking can give you a sense of where they're feeling.
Yeah, great stuff, thank you. So just to finish off this section, there is to really build that culture of feedback, there needs to be a safety, and it needs to be a safe environment for people. And it's not just normal safety, it's actually known as psychological safety. So there's a lot of work been done by Amy Edmondson, who's a Harvard professor and author of the book of The Fearless Organization. And you can see creating and developing psychological safety as the baseline really enables people to not fear about giving feedback or receiving feedback. So it's safe for interpersonal risk taking. So if you create psychological safety within groups, is that people aren't afraid of giving feedback because they know it's going to be received in the right way because you've created that base. Another way of looking at this from a trustworthiness perspective is some work done by Charles Green, and he developed up. I'm a scientist. I'm a chemist by trade. I like equations, and I quite like the equations of understanding why we tend to see some people as trustworthy and people as less trustworthy. So it's not trust as in they're doing something illegal or something coercive about it, but it's about the general trustworthiness. And the dimensions of the equation, effectively, you think about the relationship you have with another individual. So as I'm going through it, just think of a relationship you have which is a really good relationship, and a relationship which is like a problem relationship. And trustworthiness is kind of underpinning all of that. So the great relationships are where we have the other person, we view them as being trustworthy, and that's why we've got a good relationship with them. And we're not afraid to share feedback because we know we trust them. And there's people that we come across, and for some reason we don't see them as being very trustworthy. So this will be in the pack, and there's a link to a nice video online as well from Charles Green. But effectively, trustworthiness is a combination of the credibility of the other person, i.e., do they kind of sound like they know what they have, and qualifications, things like that. There might be some credibility with that. So level of credibility, level of reliability. Do they deliver on what they do? If they say they're going to deliver something, do they deliver it? Intimacy. Do I do I feel that they actually care about me? So do I feel like they have my best interest in mind when I interact with them? So they're the positive ones. And the denominator is self-orientation. How much do I feel the other person actually cares more about themselves than me? So if you think about this in kind of a high, medium, low basis, if the other person has a high level of credibility, like they're qualified, I know they know what they do, and they sound like they know what they're talking about, they deliver on what they always promise to do, and actually by our engagement, I sense that they care about me as well, then the numerator is quite high. And also, it's not all about them. I can see through their behaviors and how we interact. It's actually quite low in terms of self-orientation. That creates a high trustworthiness in our mind. Now flip it and just think about, if the other person may sound really credible, they're a professor, they're a such and such, they're a doctor, so the credibility is there, but actually they never deliver what they promise. Reliability goes to low, and they don't seem to really care about they never ask me what I want. So intimacy is quite low, and everything seems to be about them. So self-orientation is quite high. So as a scientist, from the equation, actually trustworthiness generally is quite low, and that's why I get this sense when I'm interacting with that person that trustworthiness is, well, yeah, I don't really, that in my mind they're not that they wouldn't be as trustworthy as other people I interact with. So the thing to consider for yourself is that you can kind of relate this to the people you interact with and start to understand why some people in your own mind are more trustworthy than others, and they may relate back to some of these dimensions. But also think about, as you're giving feedback to the other person, if somebody who I trust highly is giving me feedback, I value that feedback a lot more from somebody who I feel has low trustworthiness. So if you're giving feedback to somebody else, put yourself into their shoes. How trustworthy do you think they think you are? Your credibility, the language you use, the engagement you use with them. Do you have a track record of being reliable in their eyes? Do you deliver what you promise to deliver? As you're giving feedback, do they feel that you've got their best interest in mind, or is the feedback self-orientated? So what's the purpose of the feedback? Is it for them as a gift, or is it to make your life more easily? Because that can come across in how you actually give the feedback. So just think about those interactions, and also how the other person may be viewing yourself with their unconscious trustworthiness equation. And if it's about reliability or intimacy, you can change your approach in there in order to increase that. But that might be some of the blockers that we come across. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Jo now.
Thank you, Mark. So recognizing the challenges of a hybrid and remote environment, what we know is that we do need to be more intentional in this environment. So we do need to be more specific about our intent of conversation, what we're talking about and why. And recognizing this element of intention can help us think about how we can do this more successfully. When we aren't in the same room, we haven't got the ability to be able to pick up kind of verbal signals or non-verbal signals by osmosis. So we have to do it through a screen or through a telephone line. So recognizing this aspect of intentionality, I'd like to share with you some work around Kim Scott and her approach for feedback. She calls it radical candor, and it's a compass for candid conversations, a really simple and honest approach to communicating and giving feedback. And she considers 4 quadrants around 2 axes. And as you can see here on the screen, the first one being care personally, and the second one being challenging directly. And so she suggests that if we don't balance the 2, we're going to fall in one of the quadrants that aren't as effective. So the quadrants are named with quite dramatic terms, but I can explain them to you. The first quadrant, obnoxious aggression, is high challenge, low caring. The intention here perhaps would be not to support and help the individual to grow, but just to get your point across. So often the feedback is received in that threat brain, as Mark was talking about. And of course, as a person hearing it, they may experience that threat response. they fight against it, they withdraw or do nothing with it. So recognizing that ability to sometimes, when we've got a difficult message to share, we might automatically go into a more obnoxious aggression style to get our message across and forget sometimes that bit about caring personally. So that can often be an area we trip into when we've got something quite challenging to share. The next element, manipulative insincerity. This is low challenge and low caring. This is where we're not saying what we really think. We're saying what we think needs to be heard. So an example of this is maybe we're gathering feedback from a group and everybody in the room is saying yes, they're in agreement in the room. And then the real discussions happen after the meeting. Perhaps they're sharing with others or with their team that actually they're perhaps not quite in agreement. The decisions get unpicked, get unsupported, and potentially not delivered because people don't say what they really think in the moment they need to. The third element, where we're looking at where we've got kind of caring personally but low challenge, is ruinous empathy. Yeah, we fail to challenge. We want to avoid that confrontation for fear of upsetting people, making people angry, not understanding or appreciating what response, and not that uncertainty of a lack of knowing what the response is going to be can put us off. So we avoid giving feedback. And this often results in making issues worse. Either issues aren't resolved and they fester, or they get bigger. And of course, when we're not taking responsibility to give feedback when there's a challenge and other people can see that, our leadership reputation could be affected too, because we're seen as not dealing with issues and storing up future challenges. So the place we want to be, the place that Kim Scott talks about, is the radical candor. Yeah, we want to be high challenge with high caring. It's about being clear and direct, but also offering support from ourselves or to others to help make positive change happen. So we think back to intention and exploring the intention of why we're sharing the feedback. It's always positive. We're doing it to help, grow, support, help other people be more effective. We've got much more positive sense of intention, and often that doesn't get conveyed. So how can we convey that through our radical candor approach? So we've got another poll for you now, and Mark's going to launch that. Mark, are you okay to launch the poll?
Yep, it's launched.
Great. So in your experience, where has feedback you have received tended to fall? So what about you, Mark? What when you look at this model, what resonates for you here?
The brutal honesty, quite often that grates with me, is that some people think the brutal honesty is a positive thing and you've just got to take it. But if you don't sense the other person cares about you, then quite often I just take it as, well, actually I ignore the feedback. Because it is that is it the quote, I don't care what you say unless I know you care. I can't remember who said that.
Yeah, there's some, and I guess that sometimes we do default to that out of worry and fear of having to have these conversations. So interestingly, we're getting some results through now. Are you happy to share them, Mark?
We've got 90, just a few more to go. Come on, let's see if we can get 90%. Are all the votes in?
Looks like it.
Okay, end the poll, and we've got so ruinous empathy is the winner of this poll at 40, almost half ruinous empathy. Then manipulative, no obnoxious aggression, and about a quarter for radical candor.
Yeah. So again, we're seeing perhaps that ruinous empathy, that other extreme that we were talking about from obnoxious aggression, where we're caring too much. So we don't want to be clear with our feedback. We don't want to challenge directly. And I always come back to a phrase from Brené Brown. Some of you may be familiar with her work. She does a lot around TED Talks and work around shame and vulnerability-based trust. But she always talks about kindness with clarity, or clarity is kindness. So really, while we're talking about challenging directly, I think it's more about bringing clarity to what we're talking about, as opposed to challenging in a what we sometimes feel challenging to be. So we've got 6 steps to help you shift to radical candor for you when you're giving your feedback, and some really practical activity here. So first of all, step 1, Kim Scott talks about sharing stories, and she talks about explaining radical candor and the approach that you're going to take clearly, so that they understand what you're doing, especially if it is a big change and it's something you're starting to do. To recognize that people might be suspicious if all of a sudden you're doing something different. So we're bringing clarity to radical candor, what it means for you. And she talks about explaining it in your own words and maybe some examples, so that you can show your own vulnerability to build trust. Share how badly given feedback has impacted you before, and what impact it had, and what great feedback has given you, and what impact that has. She talks about you sharing personal stories with your teams and your groups will bring that concept better to life than any management theory book, etc., etc. And of course, the reason the stories help is it connects with that emotional brain, the limbic brain. It connects with something deeper than the logic and the human brain. So that bit of the brain that works much faster and connects more positively. The second step is go first. And this is again something that we always talk about when building a frequent feedback culture. Ask for feedback first about yourself. It proves that you can take it before you can give it. And that when you do give it, because you've almost given them permission first, it's often then received by others more positively. So start asking your team to give you feedback on a one-to-one and team basis, and encourage people, even if they don't say too much. Because again, if they're not used to doing it, they're likely to not start to do it until they can see for sure that you really are happy to receive it. And when you get that feedback, it's important to consider it carefully. Act on it if you think that you need to, or explain why you're not acting on it if you think you don't. But recognizing that feedback loop is really important too. The next step, growth management, is all about having great career conversations. So if we really want to build a great team, enable them to grow and develop, we need to understand what motivates each team member, how their role fits into their life goals, how it meets their values, their purpose in life, bigger than work. And so we need to spend time with our team members to understand that, learn what motivates them, what they value, the things that drive them, get to know their life story. Recognizing that somebody, some people are more open with that and some people are less open, but spending time and starting to share what's important to you, again, can help them to share back with you what's important to them. Think about where they want to get to. What are their dreams around their career? What are their aspirations? Yeah, you might be asking people to share this for the first time, so do it with care and encouragement. And then when you know where those aspirations are and the things that are important to them, help together to create a career action plan, how they can move forward to achieve some of those aspirations. And of course, keep checking in and adapting as needed. So recognizing that different kind of conversation, maybe in more depth than you might do currently. So the next step, step 4, is that checking in to make sure that you're on track with your development plan, perfecting your one-to-one conversations. So the career conversations, you've understood where people want to get to, you've put a plan in place, supporting that with meaningful one-to-ones with your direct reports or your team members, focusing on obviously completion of objectives, but also focusing on development. First of all, we have to make sure we actually have the meetings. Often they slip when we're busy, so prioritizing them, quiet, focused collaboration time for you to connect with others. It's a really important chance to hear from your team member. It's their time, not yours. So treating them as if you're spending time with somebody that you really want to get to know better, but recognizing they need to be able to speak about the things that are important to them. So as well as focusing on the tasks, how are they doing? What's going on for them in terms of the development plan? And sometimes it can be nice to schedule them, over lunch or coffee. It's a different kind of conversation. A really great conversation to have is a walking meeting, where you can just create a different environment to have a different type of conversation. So don't always think about sitting opposite a desk to each other, but actually using that time to really get to know and build that trust. Step 5, give guidance, praise and constructive criticism. So here we're talking about that positive feedback and the developmental feedback. Focus on the positive first and then share the criticism in terms of construction as a developmental approach. So being really clear about that intention to help and grow. You'll probably have to adjust how you do that for each individual, depending on your relationship with them, their personality preferences, their levels of confidence, the levels of experience, how long you've been working with them. So really emotional intelligence here is a real must. So being really aware of your impact on others and being relationally and culturally aware. And if you want to learn more about emotional intelligence, then on NIHR Learn in the Academy Leadership Development Resources, there's a module on compassionate inclusive leadership, which really helps bring emotional intelligence to life. The 6th step, the final step, take a deep breath and assess. Take time out to reflect. How is it going with my team? What's working? What's not working? Who can help? Ask for feedback from the team. How are they finding this approach? What's working for them? What's not working for them? Reflection's a really fundamental part of learning and helping others to learn, as we know. And so, and that is fundamental, if we don't reflect, it's a kind of missing element. And of course, helping others to learn and grow is such a fundamental part of your management role. So taking this time out is really critical. How well have you really got to know your direct reports through career conversations and one-to-ones? And do you really know what they value and what they want to achieve? And have you helped them uncover it? Again, there's some great tools to help us uncover values, motivations, beliefs and attitudes and purpose in the My Leadership Brand module on NIHR Learn. So I'm sure that we can share a link in the chat to some of those, and there's definitely a link in the chat to the module that supports this particular topic as well, courageous and compelling conversations. When you think about that reflection, have you really supported them to develop a plan? And are you happy that your one-to-ones are improving and that the plan's being followed? People are able to prioritise that. Are they taking responsibility and autonomy for their own development actions with your support? So really thinking about how can you really encourage people to pay attention to not only the task, but their own development and growth. So thinking about how we might have to still have some even more challenging conversations. There may be something that's particularly difficult to share. Maybe it's something personal, or maybe something that you know is going to really impact your team member. Hopefully you don't need to get to this point, because the good conversations you're having surface any issues and allow you to nip issues and challenges in the bud. But sometimes there may be times when you do need to have to fall back on something more specific to help you. So we've got a great tool to help you plan a difficult conversation and make it a more courageous and compelling conversation. And this tool is the OnetoOne feedback model. And we suggest it not as a script planning tool, but more as a framework to help you think about how you want to plan your conversation before you have the conversation. But also we encourage you, even though you've planned and thought about it, to keep that open mind, because you're not really sure what you're going to hear from the other person until you open up that conversation. So often observations, what you saw or experienced. Sometimes we have to feedback when it's something that's been fed through from another person, which is difficult, but really trying to be as factual as possible. Feelings and thoughts, sharing your feelings, and importantly, your assumptions about what you've experienced. And the reason we pick out assumptions or thoughts is because often this is where we see things differently and we can disagree, or misunderstandings occur. And so this is an important part of our planning, to be able to really tease it out. Effect, the impact or possible impact it had on you, others, or could have had. You may be checking this out as part of the conversation. And the needs, what do you need, expect to happen in the future? So what does good look like? And thinking about this as a joint conversation. So Mark, have you got a really quick example you can share with us, bringing OnetoOne to life in 1 or 2 sentences?
Oh, well, let me think. We were in a meeting the other day, Joe, and you were kind of asking people for ideas, and I came up with an idea, and you just blasted it down straight away and just dismissed the idea that I came up. That made me feel really upset by that, because what I thought from that is that actually you don't value my input. You're asking for it, but actually you don't value my input. And that meant for the rest of the meeting is that I didn't offer any ideas, because I didn't want to go through the same situation. What I could do with is, if you're asking for ideas, is that if I offer them, then they're kind of recognized and not just blasted down.
Great. So a really quick demo of OnetoOne in the moment. Of course, as an open conversation, I could have then been able to respond to Mark to explain perhaps, why I did what I did, and we'd come to some agreed outcome that it wouldn't happen again. It's really important to have these conversations with an open mind and leave space for other people to respond. As I say, I could really have had a chance with Mark then to respond with some very different feelings and thoughts, and hopefully come with a good outcome for us both. So we've got some principles around giving great feedback that are really important, and some aspects that facilitate it. So concentrating on nurturing the other person, being kind and clear, as we talked about with our radical candor. Delivering any messages that we need to share with positive intent and positive regard. So we're doing it from a good place to help somebody grow, develop, improve. And we're doing it with the intention that we believe that they can help grow and improve. And it comes, of course, with that responsibility to follow up, support, and engage as a leader. We need to facilitate it by building trust and rapport, all of those great 6 steps we talked through from Kim Scott in terms of building radical candor. We need to approach it without judgment. We've asked you to think about the assumptions, of course, but recognizing that our assumptions might be wrong, and there may be other reasons behind that. Using open questions to elicit information from the person we're talking to. Really not expecting a yes/no answer, but more more information that we can really understand the issue and their perspective of the issue. Practicing active listening. So we're listening really to understand, not to respond with our perspective or our version of events. So really using clear active listening, being fully present when we're asking questions. And of course, as we mentioned, that co-creation of an outcome, it needs to be a joint action plan to enable the other person to be feeling that they can take responsibility and accountability for that. So, a couple of useful tools, the 6 steps and the offer model. So hopefully we've helped you to consider how you can build your frequent feedback culture, how you can lead with compassion and clarity to help your virtual and hybrid team through uncertainty and ambiguity, making those faster decisions, reaching better outcomes in the face of ongoing change. And hopefully we've provided you with some food for thought in respect of how giving and asking and receiving feedback can promote a positive response. Hopefully you're going to try out some simple approaches to give feedback for maximum impact, and identified ways to reinforce that culture of feedback so it just does become the norm. And remembering it starts with you, so please do ask first. You'll see in the pack we've got a copy of lots of resources and additional reading if you're interested in any. And again, I'm going to shout out for the modules on NIHR Learn. This links particularly to courageous and compelling conversations, but we've got empowerment and motivation. We've got leader as a coach. I've already mentioned another couple too that can be really helpful to help you build this kind of style of leadership. And that's all that we've got to share with you for now, but we really would love to answer your questions. So I'll hand back to Martine, and we can see what's come through the chat.
Yes, we certainly can. It's always a great subject matter, isn't it? And I absolutely love Kim Scott. To get a chance to watch her TED Talk, it's amazing. So great as radical candor. All right, so shall we get into the first question then? And again, just a reminder that there's still chance and time to pop in your questions and to upvote. If you can just click on the little thumb icon, that would be great. So we'll start with the first one then. So what can I do if I have given feedback a number of times, but my direct reports doesn't accept there is an issue?
So I think this is where we need to perhaps up the clarity and tone down the kindness. Keep the kindness, not lose it, but up the clarity. I think if there's been some conversations and they've been open conversations where you've been able to talk about assumptions and thoughts and be able to tease those out, but they've still not quite hit the mark, then I think it's about really taking some time out to be a bit more clear and explain that, you know, we've had some conversations. I don't feel that we're seeing a change in behaviour, and I really need to understand why that is. So I would suggest dialing up the clarity and keeping the kindness, but maybe dialing it a little bit down so that you can be much more specific. Anything to add, Mark?
No, nothing. No builds on that one. Thanks, Jo.
Okay.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. We'll go into the next one. So what if people don't have career ambitions and see it as just a job?
It's a really fair point that not everyone has a career. However, in terms of that particular step, the key thing around there is to understand what the other person's motivations are, and understand what the other person's kind of life story, you know, what their life looks like. So what they're turning up to between the hours of 9 and 5 every day may not be what actually motivates them. It might be the things they do outside of work. By understanding that, you can start to work with them to see, you know, we understand that you may not have a career, and actually work is not your life, but actually what you do impacts others around you, and actually the feedback is to help them, but because they have an impact on other people which they may not be aware of. So even though it may not be a career conversation, but it's kind of you know, how can we make this bit better? Because actually, I understand how it fits into your life. I understand how you're motivated, and that helps with positioning the feedback as well.
Yeah, I think I'd just add to that, that irrespective of kind of ambition, we all want to come to work and make a difference. Most human beings want to come to work to make a difference and feel happier when they do. So even if we're really comfortable in our role and, you know, we're doing a great job, we can always find ways of doing that better, sharing some of that knowledge, maybe supporting others, and things that make us feel good about our work. So I would absolutely echo everything Mark said, but recognizing even staying within role, there's so much more we can do, and we can encourage people to see that and feel that.
Okay, thank you. I've just got one in the chat box there. And it says, so what if your superiors do not accept that there is a problem?
So this is upward feedback, of course, always more challenging. Again, I would come back to being really clear and being compassionate with whoever it is that we're chatting to, you know, when we're influencing upward. We obviously can't force people to change or force people to take our perspective, but we can influence it. And I think often when it's an upward discussion, if we tend to focus on the impact on the organisation rather than an impact on an individual or an impact on team, what that tends to do is dial down the self-orientation and up the orientation around the greater good. And that can often have a more successful outcome, because you're not going in for the conversation about something for me as an individual, you're going into the conversation about the impact it's having on the organisation. So an example, I don't know, maybe I want to do something differently, but I can see it will be better for me to do that. I'd be much more stressing the impact it's going to have on the outcome of the result rather than the thing that's better for me. Anything to add, Mark?
No, it's just that you said often, and remember that often also starts with O, and so this is the observation. So if they don't accept there's a problem, that's the data is being interpreted differently. So using a framework like often is you're actually identifying the thing you're giving feedback on, which is a fact. How people interpret the fact is different, and that's all part of the feedback.
Good point. Yeah.
Okay, fabulous, thank you. So this is always an interesting one. So I have to feedback on a personal issue and I'm worried about upsetting my team member.
Yeah.
This kind of relates back to the David Rock model, isn't it, of the scarf model. It's you're afraid you're going to hurt somebody's feelings by giving the feedback. So the question is, I don't know the context of the personal issues, but for what reason are you giving the feedback? Is it for them as a gift, or is it for you? And making sure if it's for them, then how you communicate it in that way. But also think about the triggers in the scarf model. Which one do you think is you're going to hurt? Why do you think you're going to hurt their feelings? And quite often it's just the way we communicate the feedback is the thing we're not confident of, and hence we upset the other person. So just thinking about what you think is going to be triggered and actually test it with the other person.
I think as well, when there is something that's particularly triggering in terms of that threat brain, is recognizing that, because we all have it and we can't remove the threat brain reaction. We can't remove that kind of, oh, I'm being threatened here. What we can do is give that person a little bit of time and space so that they can then move into more safe brain thinking in the emotional and logical brain. So when we have got a difficult message, is pauses, silences, which sometimes can feel a bit uncomfortable, but it gives people a chance to just breathe, take a moment, a sip of water, just to gather their thoughts, because whilst they're in threat brain, their blood's down here and they're not thinking and hearing with logic. You know, it's all about the threat. So if we can get the blood back into the front of the brain and allow people to be able to hear and make some rational thought around what people are saying, then that can be a much more positive conversation.
Thank you. Now we only have one more question at this moment in time, unless anyone else wants to pop any more questions in our question box there. So the last one we've got at the moment is, my colleagues aren't comfortable with videos on, and I would prefer it. It's all around that connection, isn't it? So when we are sharing ideas and feedback, so what can I do?
Well, I quite often have to ask people to turn their cameras on for sessions that I'm running, and most people do. And I think if there's a culture where it doesn't happen, people just don't do it. But actually, if you ask them to, they're often quite happy to do that. Obviously, it's difficult to force people to do it if they're really not comfortable. But I would always suggest to explain, you know, I want us to see each other while we're giving feedback, because it gives us a chance to really connect in a better way. So again, explaining our intention of why we're asking somebody to do that can often be the motivator, especially when it's a positive intention, can be the motivator to act.
Yeah, the only build I have it is that the other person might have a really good reason why they've not put it, which they just haven't shared. So giving, as Joe said, being courageous with actually sharing why it's impacting you, what impact it's having on you, enables the other person to say, oh, actually, I didn't realize that, because actually I've got a really good reason why I can't. And it brings them into the conversation then.
Okay, fabulous. Right, well, we have no more questions.
Some great questions there. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so thanks again, Mark and Joe. Hopefully everyone has found this webinar beneficial. I always find this such a great subject matter, and feels able to implement some of the behaviours that we've explored. So as I've mentioned at the start of the webinar, for those of you joining us live, as we close the session, you'll be asked to complete a quick evaluation form, and a link you'll see is now available. So this will give you an opportunity to share your email address, and then you'll be able to receive a copy of the slides today. And if you do have time, please do provide us with your feedback, because it really is very helpful for us to receive your feedback. So all of our past webinars can be found on our NRHR TV YouTube channel under the Development and Support webinars. And as Joe has mentioned today as well, we've got lots and lots of resources available to you to complement today's session. So we've got our online leadership development resources on NRHR Learn, if you've not registered already, because there's 12 modules, and they're really fabulous modules we've got available and of no cost to yourself. And we've also got our NRHR Academy events page. So please pop along there as well, and you'll see there's some other lots of different activities that are taking place. So once again, thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you enjoyed this session, as we've mentioned, and enjoy the rest of your day. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.